These events took place in the southeastern United States. Just for reference, I'm a middle-aged woman married with children. I can't lie, I've always had an interest in the unknown, paranormal, and supernatural. The idea of unidentified beings living just on the cusp of mankind is fascinating to me, and with our home nestled deep in the woods, I sometimes find myself scanning the tree line in hopes of catching a glimpse of something. While we've had bear caught on trail cam, coyotes yipping nearby, and a visual sighting of a big cat crossing our driveway, I've never seen anything inexplicable. However, I never dreamed what I actually would encounter would change how I feel about the mysteries of the forest forever. It was the fall of 2019, and the report of an unidentified animal attack on a child had just taken place about an hour from where we live. As the reports go, a grandfather looked out his window to see his grandson being mauled by an animal that he could not identify. In most situations like this, a grandparent or a parent would without hesitation run to the aid of their child or grandchild. But on this day, and during this attack, what the grandfather saw rendered him helpless. The fear-stricken man called 911 in a last-ditch effort to save his grandson's life. At the time this story first broke, the 911 recording was available online, and unless Grandpa was an award-winning actor, this call was nothing short of chilling. During the call, the grandfather pleaded with the 911 operator to send someone to help his grandson. The operator inquired as to what type of animal was attacking the child, but all he could say was that he didn't know. He stammered out multiple times that he had never seen anything like it. When questioned as to if it was a dog attacking the child, he sharply retorted that it was not, and again repeated that he had never seen anything like it. He went on to describe the animal as having the ears of a wolf, but it most certainly wasn't a wolf. The 911 operator urged him to assist his grandson, but it was at that moment the grandfather let out a cry of fear as he exclaimed the animal had stood up on its two hind legs and was now dragging his grandson up an embankment and into the woods. The grandfather was in anguish as he kept repeatedly saying that he just could not go outside. When the sheriffs finally arrived, they were directed to the embankment. Making their way over, the officers struggled to climb the wet and slippery slope, repeatedly sliding. The idea that something could ascend the practically impassable embankment and all while dragging a body seemed impossible, at least for a human. Finally, at the top, law enforcement began to search for the missing child. One officer was quoted as saying, "Something's wrong up here. There's just something here." Uncomfortable, he made his way back down. Officials stated that they couldn't see any definitive drag marks up the hill, meaning whatever this animal was had carried the defenseless child. Eventually, the victim was located and sadly deceased. Very soon after, the detailed articles and 911 recording were pulled offline. It was reported that local law enforcement was removed from the case and replaced by a higher government branch. Law enforcement and Fish and Game were stumped as to what type of animal would venture into someone's yard in the middle of the day and do such a thing, and the attack had left locals terrified. Unable to positively identify bite and claw marks left behind, DNA swabs had been done, but results were inconclusive. About a week after the fatal attack, in the adjoining county to the west, a farmer woke to find several of his horses had been killed in their pasture. Their throats had been ripped out, among other serious wounds. Now, I'm no expert, but to my knowledge, wild animals typically kill to eat and not just for fun. These poor horses weren't eaten, but rather mindlessly slaughtered. Now, I think this disturbed me just as much as the human attack, if not more. Fast forward another week or so, and again, the next adjoining county to the west, there was another animal attack. This time, it was two mules that had suffered the same fate as the horses, and yet again, not eaten. I personally felt like a pattern was forming, and in tracking the direction that the unknown assailant was headed, should it stay on the same course, my home county was next. On our little homestead, we have several family dogs, a couple of big ones, a couple of medium ones, and then one little fella only weighing in at about 10 pounds that goes by Oliver. Now, having said that, no one ever told Oliver that he was small. He felt like he was a giant of a dog and had harbored the courage of a lion. He was the leader of his residential pack and a force to be reckoned with, or so he thought. This little dog was fearless and backed down from nothing. Matter of fact, one day, a stray had wandered into our yard. Now, this stray was a huge mongrel mix of two unknown giants, but that didn't matter to Oliver. Spotting something that was not supposed to be in his yard, he took off running after it. Now, entirely panicked that he would be torn to pieces, my husband and I ran after him, shouting for him to stop. But of course he didn't, and was soon out of sight, continuing his mission to destroy the infiltrator. Hearing him begin to release this awful high-pitched scream mixed with a bark, our hearts sank. When we finally caught up, we were sickened by the thought of what carnage we would find. But imagine our surprise in seeing our whopping 10-pounder swinging from the lips of his horrified victim. Oliver had launched a full-on face attack on this giant dog, which I think in reality probably left them both stunned. We broke up the altercation, and the shocked trespasser quickly fled the scene. Anyway, all of this to say that nothing scared that little dog. Now, one evening, I was out walking Oliver, and we hadn't gone too far from the porch when a bone-chilling, animalistic sound echoed out of the holler and next to our house. This sound is almost indescribable. It wasn't quite a howl, nor a roar, but something eerily in between. Now, it seems so cheesy to describe it this way, but it's the only thing that I can think of. Now, I don't even know if the show still airs, but back then there was a program titled Finding Bigfoot. The cast would set up in various places and try to call out potential Sasquatch in the area by mimicking what they believed the elusive creature may sound like and making noises that they thought it might make. They would often yell at the top of their voice into the forest. The yell was a very distinct whooping sound, not a scream or any noise that ended abruptly, but a long and deep, drawn-out whoop. The sound that I heard bellow from the holler was strikingly similar and so powerful that the diaphragm on whatever was making it had to be massive. The deep, long, and loud whoop burst out from below our front yard and echoed around the back of our house, bouncing off the tall hill behind us and then making its way around to the other side. The sound reverberated around our entire property. Temporarily stunned by the suddenness of it all, I just stood there in shock, staring into the woods, trying to process what I had just heard. However, our fearless little dog took off. And no, not towards it, but this time away from it. He had never shown fear at all, but in that moment ran so fast back to the house in an attempt to place distance between him and whatever had made that sound, that once reaching the porch steps in his bid for safety, he tripped and stumbled up the first two before finally gaining his balance and darting towards the front door. This was one trespasser he most certainly did not want to tangle with. Naturally, I took what I had experienced to Facebook and asked all the, quote, experts what animal they thought could have produced such a powerful roar. I then spent hours on YouTube searching all of their suggestions. I looked up videos on everything from meerkat to peacock to elk, you name it, and nothing was even remotely close. All I know is it left me very unsettled and uncomfortable going outside on my own, and it definitely had terrified our dog. So a little time after that, I can't remember exactly how long, possibly a week, it was midday and I was home alone when one of our other dogs started barking. Now this would be one of the medium-sized dogs that I had mentioned before. Her name is Ruby and she's our farm dog. Ruby spends her days outdoors patrolling our property and protecting our livestock. She's very well trained and takes her job quite seriously, so when she barks, we pay heed. I went to the kitchen door to look out and see what she was barking at, and I found her standing at the base of the hill behind our house, barking up into the woods. Whatever she was barking at definitely had her riled up pretty good, as her hackles were up, her lips were curled back, exposing her teeth, and her ears were at full attention. She would run forward into the thick brush up the hill just a little ways before immediately retreating. She did this several times, lunging into the woods before quickly backing out. I opened the door and called her over in an attempt to calm her down. And even though I was stroking her back and doing my best to soothe her, she kept looking back over her shoulder. She just couldn't settle. I told her to go to the front porch and relax and to not fool with whatever was in the woods. Still hesitant, She eventually began to walk towards the front porch, but then turned around and immediately went back and started barking ferociously in the same spot again. So now realizing she wasn't going to let this go, and not wanting her to get hurt, I called her into the house. Only after she came in did I realize that our two big guard dogs out back, Brutus and Mick, who had been fenced into the backyard at the time, well, they weren't barking. Our backyard runs partially up the wooded hill that I've been speaking about, so the two other dogs most definitely had the same vantage point as Ruby had, yet not a peep. Now concerned for their well-being, I walked across the deck and peeked over the fence to see where they were. As I was doing this, I jokingly called out to them asking where Ruby's backup was, thinking that they would come running over. But instead, I found them sitting on the steps leading to the back door, both giant dogs barely fitting, squeezed in side by side on the top step with their bodies pressed into the door, both with heads turned the opposite direction from where Ruby had been focusing her attention. I read their body language and actions to say that they wanted no part of whatever was in the woods. They were frightened. I let them in the house as well to help calm the situation. I was going to give whatever was in the woods enough time to move out before any of us went outside again. A couple of hours had passed and it was now time for evening feedings, so I opened the door and let Ruby back outside as she likes to follow us around and assist in our chores. Immediately, she ran back to the same spot, sniffed the air, and started ferociously barking again. I was dismayed to realize that whatever was hanging around earlier, in fact, was still there. I turned to call her over to me, and that's when I saw it. The sun was beginning to set behind the hill, leaving the trees and brush silhouetted in front of it. It happened so fast, but was unmistakable. Running down the hill at a speed far too quick for a human, I saw it. It was bipedal, but not human. It was tall and broad, and it had the slightest hump on its back, and it was cutting through briars, thick brush, and fallen trees with absolute ease. Could a human traverse that hill? Sure, but slowly and calculated as it's treacherous. But I saw it. Whatever it was dashed down the hill and behind a large cluster of trees about 200 feet from where I was standing. Now, I'm not saying that this was a Sasquatch, but it was definitely something unnatural. Though fast, I was able to see what appeared to be hair covering its body. Once I laid eyes on this unidentified thing, I lost focus on our dog. So by the time I broke my gaze from the trees and turned to secure her, she bolted. She was running straight towards it. As Ruby disappeared into the tall grass, my heart was pounding so hard it felt as if it would come out of my chest. I wanted to run after her, but ashamedly, fear had me frozen in place. I managed to shout her name in an attempt to get her to stop, but no chance. She was gone. I listened as her bark drifted further and further away until it abruptly stopped. My hands were trembling and my stomach was in knots. Screaming out her name at the top of my voice, I pleaded with her to come back. Realizing I had made a foolish mistake of going outside without any form of protection, I was about to run into the house to grab something when the grass and briars began to rustle. It was her. Relief rushed through me as she crossed the yard towards me, but something was wrong. Her hackles were down, her ears were laid back, and her tail was tucked between her legs. She was scared by whatever had awaited her among the trees. She gave no hesitation when told to get in the house, and quite frankly, she looked happy for it. When my husband arrived home, I told him about the encounter, how the dog reacted, what I saw, all of it. And while he believed that I believed I saw something, it sounded pretty wild to him, and he just wasn't sure. But I know what I saw. That evening, when it was time to secure our livestock, we did it together. I wanted no one outside alone. Before going to bed that night, I checked and double-checked to make sure all the windows and doors were locked tight. I felt a type of unsettling fear that I hadn't felt before, a fear that only the unknown could cause. What did I see? What could have possibly traversed the woods that easily and quickly? The events of the day had definitely had an adverse effect on me. However, they were nothing compared to what happened the following morning. As I was about to put the coffee on, the phone rang. My neighbor who lived across the road had phoned to advise us to keep our animals locked away safely, as he had woke that morning to discover one of his horses dead in the pasture. Its throat had been ripped out. Hey guys, it's Chrissy here. As an addendum, in researching this story, the official investigation concluded that the child was killed by a pack of dogs. Now, in my opinion, this is absolutely nonsense and does not fit the circumstances. But what do you guys think? go ahead and let me know in the comments. And if you want to discuss anything else further, just let me know and I'll see what I can do.